Robert Lord Hayward, who's a Conservative peer and pollster who joins us. Good morning to you, Robert.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to ask you, first of all, in terms of looking at this election, can we talk about this new YouGov poll suggests that Reform are creeping up to just 2 points behind the Conservatives on 90%, Reform on the 17%. This is obviously first poll taken after Nigel Farage went back to the front of the fore of the political fray. We've got Labour obviously still way ahead, but does this suggest that, as Nadine Dorries has predicted, Reform could overtake the Tories in the polls?
I'm not sure that anybody should cite Nadine Dorries as the best political pundit going. But I think there is a more important issue here, and that is the question of the consistency of the polls. I don't want polls to be utterly consistent because there's no point in that.
You wouldn't have a job.
But in one poll, as you say, Reform are on 17% and the Conservatives are on 19%. In another one published today, Ipsos Mori, Reform are on 9%. In other words, virtually half of what Reform are given in YouGov poll. So there's a huge inconsistency. It's very difficult polling, particularly for smaller parties, because you either have to underweight or overweight them, which gets the sorts of distortions. But it really is quite abnormal to be in the position where any party is almost double in one poll what it is in another.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we know that it's incredible how the difference for smaller parties, the amount of support they might get in different seats. But I saw some really interesting graph showing where Reform was second place against Labour in many of the seats that they would be looking to fight. We know they're planning to stand, was it 630 candidates, all the British mainland seats. Everyone's obviously racing to get enough candidates in by Friday, and the deadline to finalise voting nominations. But they are, in each of those seats, Reform are way behind Labour in those battleground seats. So even if they did double their support, they still, it would appear, wouldn't be able to overtake Labour. So is it perfectly possible we could be in a situation, so I suppose reminiscent of the SDP, where they first launched, where you can fight an election, they could get over 20% in the polls and not really end up with many seats, or indeed any seats at all?
Yes, you put your finger on one of Reform and any minor party's problems in a first-past-the-post system. There's no doubt that if you look beyond the headlines like Clacton, headline seats like Clacton, actually the places where it's most likely that Reform will be major challengers, then places like Great Yarmouth and Thurrock and one or two other places. But overwhelmingly, they're in places like South Yorkshire, the North East, Sunderland, for example, where Reform could clock up huge votes, but they wouldn't threaten Labour's majority in those seats.
It's going to be fascinating to watch tonight. But again, it keeps us all in jobs, doesn't it? And voters, as we know, Brexit referendum onwards, I know the pollsters will try to tidy up, and get their more accurate polling, take into account, the shy Tory voter and things like that. But actually, voters have a funny habit of doing what they want to do on the day.
Well, sadly, it was 32 years ago that I did the analysis, which actually gave rise to the phrase shy Tories. It just makes me depressingly feel so old.
Let me talk about some of the offerings we've had from the Tory party, though, because we've got this battle over this £2,000 claim that the tax rises would come from Labour if they were in power, which has been totally poo-pooed by Labour. Also, indeed, the idea that the civil service and the Treasury had anything to do with it. The permanent Secretary of the Treasury said, no, we didn't, thank you very much. Big question marks about those claims. We've had a lot of that sort of stuff before. It has always happened and always will. But Jeremy Hunt is pledging that the Tories will protect the family home from damaging tax rises. They're saying, there'll be a family home tax guarantee. So, changing council tax bans or other new property charges. So if it's your family home, you won't pay capital gains tax on it. They're announcing things like killers to get tougher sentences with an overhaul of the law, introducing tougher sentences for killers up to 25 years, not 15. Murder in their first and second degree being brought in from America to provide for those tougher sentences for the more heinous crimes. This ticks a lot of Tory boxes, doesn't it? But do you not think an awful lot of would-be Tory voters and past Tory voters would say, well, if you thought this was a good idea, why haven't you done this already?
Well, there's no question that the Tories and the Labour Party are producing things which are somewhat nebulous in most cases. If one looks, I think when I was last on with you, I said about the fact that the general election would take 10 days or so to take off. It has now taken off, although it's quite rightly paused somewhat for the celebration in Normandy. But the significant thing that came out of the debate on Tuesday evening was this £2,000 aimed at Labour, the accusation.
Well, see,
And
for me, it was the fact that Keir Starmer wouldn't save his wife or his kid's life by going to private healthcare. That, to me, was the fact of the night. But there we are.
well, everybody picks up very different things, but what is striking about the media, and you've been making reference to it in the last few minutes before I came on, has been the discussion of Rishi's very successful attack on Labour about this £2,000.
Yeah.
And therefore, he will feel pleased that he's framed the debate. The Tories have been flatlining way behind Labour for a long period of time. But there is no question that the main subject that has been discussed in the last 2 or 3 days is that £2,000.
Yeah. That said, I mean, I keep seeing front pages of the Tory supporting, well, largely would normally be Tory supporting papers, the Telegraph, the Mail, and others, where they're talking about tax cut, promise of tax cuts. That's what Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt need to do. That's what's going to be the game changer this election. Is there any evidence that that is what the public are crying out for? Because it seems to me what they're asking for largely is they want people, they want the cost of living down. Okay, that does involve taxes, but taxes are going up at the moment anyway. But they care about things like immigration, the NHS. But largely it's about they want things to work. They want public services to work, and that doesn't involve tax cuts.
I think there's no question about it that the electorate is more fluid now than I've ever known it. If you look at the polls, if you look at the subsets of questions, there is a very clear indication that people, although they may be saying they're voting Labour, Conservative, Reform, Lib Dem, Green, or whatever, they are in effect also saying that we're not strongly committed and we might well change our minds between now and the general election.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the key issue is economics. Every Western democracy at every election shows that
it's the economy, stupid
taxation economy that people ultimately most vote on. There will be people who are influenced by green issues or immigration or
whether women have penises, things like that. But it's always the cost of living. Really good to talk to you. I know we'll talk to you many more times before polling day. Lord Hayward, Conservative peer at pollster, thank you so much for joining us.